Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliette Mann.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Victory for the far-right national rally in the first round of the French parliamentary elections.
China's small and medium-sized manufacturers are the engine of growth again, expanding at the fastest rate in 3 years.
The US Supreme Court rules that former President Donald Trump is partially immune from criminal prosecution as he faces action for trying to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
Boeing buyback. The aircraft titan acquires fuselage maker Spirit Aerosystems in a $4.7 billion deal.
And a boon for tourism. People from Poland can now travel to China visa-free for up to 15 days.
The far right has won the first round of France's snap parliamentary elections. The National Rally took 33% of the vote. The left-wing New Popular Front polled 28%, and President Emmanuel Macron's centrist bloc trailed in third on 21%.
Yes, Marine Le Pen's party could become the country's first far-right government since World War II. She's described it as an historic moment.
My dear compatriots, democracy has spoken, and the French people have placed the National Rally and its allies on top and have practically erased President Emmanuel Macron's bloc.
Our correspondent Will Denslow joins us now live from Paris. Will, this is certainly not the outcome that President Macron was hoping for when he called this election.
Well, that's absolutely right. And speaking to voters here the day after the first round of voting, there's a huge amount of shock, dismay amongst those that are critical and certainly not supporters of the National Rally. There's also, according to some I've spoken to, a huge amount of anger directed towards French President Emmanuel Macron for calling this snap election just 3 weeks after his centrist Renaissance party really got trounced in European elections, considering the fact that the French population wasn't expected to head to the polls at the domestic level until 2027. There's been a huge uproar from many opponents of the National Rally, but as far as Marine Le Pen, the long-standing figurehead for the National Rally, is concerned, she says the huge voter turnout we saw during the first round, some 20% or so higher than we saw during voting in 2022, was further provided legitimacy for their strong performance. However, Marine Le Pen, Jordan Bardella, the leader of the National Rally, says the work is not done yet, asking supporters to remain galvanized ahead of the July 7th runoff. Emmanuel Macron is calling his supporters to do what they can and says that it is imperative for them to show a clear democratic alliance to block the National Rally from securing an absolute majority in the second round. That very much a point reiterated by the Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, who is very much at this stage vying for his job.
Tonight's lesson is that the far right is on the doorstep of power. Never before in our democracy has the National Assembly risked being dominated by the far right as it was tonight. And so our objective is clear: to prevent the National Rally from having an absolute majority in the second round, from dominating the National Assembly, and therefore from governing the country with its disastrous project.
So France into fairly uncharted territory, Will. How's the business community reacting? What are the markets doing?
Well, we saw a strong bounce back for the CAG at the end of trading, up well over 1% at the close. And this is a big change in direction for the markets here in France, considering the fact that since June 1st, the markets here had been down around 5%, largely due to the uncertainty, first of all, ahead of the European elections we saw in early June, and then this plenty of uncertainty, plenty of volatility as we headed towards these parliamentary elections. analysts, though, are looking at this pickup in sentiment for the markets, perhaps as a reading is the fact that the National Rally has not secured an absolute majority yet, and perhaps not the election results weren't as emphatic as some analysts, some polling was perhaps potentially expecting. There are, of course, a number of other factors to take into consideration. In Europe, we have the release of big inflation data for the Eurozone out on Tuesday. That is something watched very closely around Europe. And, of course, there's a small matter that France are taking on Belgium essentially as we speak. So perhaps some optimism here in France as well ahead of that.
Will Denslow in Paris, thank you very much.
Christian Schulz is Chief European Economist at Citi. Great to see you, Christian. Now, as we were hearing there from our correspondent, well, it's been a good day for French assets, as investors seem to be buying into France after that first round. Are they celebrating too soon?
Well, I think they're returning a little bit. Clearly, we haven't made up for all the losses of the last 3 weeks yet. It's just the first step. And I think the main driver is that, as your colleague was saying, it could have been worse. Many in the markets had at least feared of a tail risk that the far left would end up with a majority or a chance on a majority, and that seems to not be the case. So we're now down to two scenarios: one that the far right wins the election and runs the country, more or less, and the other is that we end up with some form of stalemate in Parliament and no real French policy direction from here on onwards.
Well, looking at those two scenarios then, what might those mean for the French economy and then more broadly for the EU?
For the French economy, I guess you have to really look into the program of the far right, of the Rassemblement National. The program that we had in 2022 was quite far-reaching. At some point, estimates were that it would cost around 100 billion per year to implement all the tax cuts and spending increases that they had planned. They've reduced that to some degree. They're focusing on just two measures. One is a cut in VAT on energy, so making energy cheaper, which is clearly something that people want and probably voted for. And the other is an exemption on social security contributions for companies that raise the wage bill by 10%. So higher wages or more employment is what this measure is targeting. So these are two measures which are costly and are going to drive the already very high French deficit even higher and debt higher, and that may lead to some concern, but it's not revolutionary. I think the main concern, and that's I think what you're alluding to, is France's role in Europe. The far right has been critical, and that is something that people clearly are concerned about.
You did mention French debt. I mean, it's 112% of GDP, the highest in the developing world after Japan and US, which have much larger economies. And the credit rating in France has been downgraded twice, I believe, in the last 6 months. So what impact do you think these election results are going to have on France's debt crisis and economic outlook?
In terms of debt, the only way is up, right? The deficits are going to stay high, the debt level is going to continue rising, and that is going to potentially put pressure on these credit ratings. Again, that is one of the concerns that people have. At the same time, the French governments in the past have got away with rising debt ratios for a long time, unlike, for example, their neighbors in Spain or in Italy who've had a crisis, or even the UK just 2 years ago under Liz Truss had a bond market crisis. That could be the risk here, that people or French politicians are underestimating how much concern there is in markets, and that there could be a backlash in the markets that then triggers also an economic crisis. But for the time being, that's certainly not our base case, and you can see with the market reaction that also the market isn't really playing that card just yet. There's a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for the French far right that they may go down the route of the Italian government under Giorgia Meloni, which seems to be running the country fairly well at the moment.
Christian Schulz, pleasure seeing you again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The European Commission has accused Meta of breaching the EU's new digital laws with an advertising model that charges users for ad-free versions of Facebook and Instagram. The tech giant launched a pay or consent model last year in an effort to comply with the bloc's data privacy rules. But an initial ruling by the Commission said that the binary choice forces users to consent to the combination of their personal data and fails to provide them with a less personalised but equivalent version of Meta's social networks. The world's biggest asset management company, BlackRock, has agreed to a deal to buy the UK data firm Preqin for $3.2 billion. Preqin provides data on alternative assets, and its acquisition signals BlackRock's intention to become a major player in alternative investments. China and Serbia's free trade agreement has come into effect, with tariffs on 60% of goods suspended immediately. Duties will eventually be eliminated on 95% of imports and exports, including cars, lithium batteries and telecoms equipment from China, and generators, tyres and beef from Serbia. China is setting up a new state entity to search for deep oil and gas reserves. The body will include the country's 2 key oil and gas producers, along with 7 other state bodies. It follows President Xi Jinping's call for new productive forces to improve energy security. China is the world's largest crude oil importer and relies on imports for nearly 3/4 of its needs. While China's manufacturing sector grew at its fastest pace for 3 years in June, the Zhejiang manufacturing PMI came in at 51.8 for June. Anything above 50 indicates growth, and it was boosted by strong production and stabilising employment.
The Zhejiang manufacturing PMI coming in much stronger than the official data and even beating expectations, firmly in expansion territory, of course. The markets, though, really did welcome the sign that the manufacturing sector is on steadier footing after the Zhejiang survey. And at the same time, investors can also point to the less exciting home price data as a justification for calling for more stimulus measures. So really today they got to have their cake and eat it too.
Tim Pope reporting there. Well, let's bring in Mark Ostwald, Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services International. Mark, welcome back. Always good to see you. So it's welcome PMI for China, this reading of 51.8 for June. How significant is this, and what factors could be behind that?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish it also from the official MBS data, which obviously weakened. The important thing is they are very different surveys. The Zhejiang survey is focused largely on SMEs, and to a large extent in any economy, it doesn't matter, what the political control is. SMEs create the most jobs, whereas the official MBS PMI is focused on large companies and state-owned companies. So that signals that things are there's still a bit of a struggle. And indeed, it's sort of echoed in the breakdown of the Zhejiang survey, where the real strong demand is coming at, or strong production is coming at the consumer goods level and the intermediate goods level. I always like to see strong intermediate goods demand, because it's going then to final production of larger finished goods, consumer durables above all. So that's a healthy sign that demand must be picking up to a certain extent. To a certain extent, it's also reflective of the time of year, as a lot of people, a lot of exporters in China will be looking to the Christmas rush and getting their production ready so that it's ready to be shipped to Europe and North America. But it's a healthy sign of demand. The downside on all of this is that margins are still under pressure. And that means that the industrial profits number that we saw recently, which was quite weak, will probably continue to see some pressure there. And that's really where the domestic demand, which leaves a lot to be desired, shall we say, and will require more stimulus measures, really is going to make the key difference in the second half of the year.
Okay, and what does it mean for the rest of the world, the rest of us, with fairly robust manufacturing? How could that influence global supply chains?
Well, it also influences global supply chains, because at the end of the day, if the finished goods are getting made, then there's still going to be good demand for raw materials from the rest of the world, which is a positive. It's also basically a healthy signal for the rest of the world in the sense of a lot of this is going to exports, and therefore demand elsewhere is still fairly robust. I would probably highlight the fact that at the same time as the Chinese PMIs, we also had fairly robust PMIs in the manufacturing sector across much of Asia. So there is this sign that, China, in collaboration with the rest of Asia, is probably giving that much needed boost to the global economy, which basically is still being driven by Asian growth.
Okay, Mark Oswald, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure.
On Tuesday, China's President Xi Jinping is scheduled to visit Kazakhstan and also attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Kazakhstan plans to increase trade in local currencies, which it says will reduce costs and increase competitiveness. CGTN spoke to Kazakhstan's central bank chief in Astana.
Kazakhstan is an extractive economy, so we're heavily dependent on oil and gas, uranium, metals, and things like that. And as you obviously know, all of those goods, they're traded in US dollars. So basically, they're exchange-traded goods. So all the global trade pretty much takes place in dollars. So that's why we have to go by the rules of the global markets, and therefore we have dollar is the majority of the within the payment structure of our foreign trade relations. When you trade with your partner through some intermediate currency, you're facing additional expenses. And in the world of business, in the world of commerce, any additional tariff, any additional fee is very important, because you're losing your competitiveness, you're losing your income, your margins, and things like that. So the shorter the way between the mutual interaction, the better. And therefore, we strongly support the overall move towards trading within our organization in local currencies, in our national currencies. But it's not an easy job by no means, because all of the SCO countries, they have different currency regimes, they have different regulations, different laws, and therefore to bring it all together under one umbrella and start trading in local currencies is a formidable task. We believe that the key benefit is reduction of costs. I mean, we don't want to overly politicize this issue. It's pure commerce. It's pure business. I mean, if you go through a euro, dollar, I don't know, any other currency of the world, Swiss franc, you have to pay your cost twice, because you convert into one of the hard currencies, and then you have to reconvert it into your partner's currency, and you're losing on both ways. Therefore, the shorter the way from supplier to its customer and vice versa, the better.
And you're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Chinese car maker Chery makes its debut in the UK with the arrival of its international brand, Omoda.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN. Welcome back. Boeing shares have dipped after the US Justice Department urged the plane maker to plead guilty to criminal fraud over 2 fatal crashes involving its 737 MAX jetliners.
Families of those who died have described the plea deal as shameful, saying it allows Boeing to avoid going to trial by paying a fine. Our correspondent Mitch McCann is in New York for us now with more on this. So, Mitch, what does the Justice Department's offer involve?
Yeah, well, hi, Paul. It's reported that the Department of Justice's plea deal would require Boeing to plead guilty to defrauding the United States and for it to pay a substantial sum of money for its conduct. Now, Boeing is accused of misleading the Federal Aviation Administration here in the US during its evaluation of the Boeing 737 MAX. Now, this all stems from 2 crashes involving that aircraft in 2018 and in 2019. In which more than 340 people were killed in total. The first crash occurred in Indonesia, was operated by Lion Air, and the second was in Ethiopia, operated by Ethiopian Airlines. Now, lawyers representing families of the victims say they met with government prosecutors in recent days who made them aware of this plea deal being offered to Boeing, which would allow the company to avoid a public trial. Now, that deal is reported to involve a guilty plea. The fine I mentioned would be in the range of $200 million US, and Boeing would be on probation for 3 years and would also have to agree to the appointment of an external corporate monitor. Now, 2 lawyers representing the families said in a statement that the Justice Department is preparing to offer Boeing another sweetheart plea deal, and added that the families expressed their dissatisfaction when they were made aware of it by the prosecutors. What's also important to note here is that Boeing already was part of a plea agreement for these incidents, which was imposed in 2021. Now, as part of that, Boeing had to abide by the terms of the deal for 3 years to have criminal immunity. But days before that deal expired, a door plug blew out on an Alaskan Airlines 737 MAX flight, opening the company up to prosecution again. Now, of course, this comes at a very difficult time for Boeing, which is under intense scrutiny for relaxed safety standards or perceived relaxed safety standards. And if Boeing accepts the proposed agreement, it will be up to a Texas judge to agree with it and put that in force.
OK, and Mitch, there's another strand to explore, isn't there? Boeing has struck a deal to buy back Spirit Aerosystems, which makes the body of the 737 MAX jet. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right. Boeing once owned Spirit Aerosystems. It now says it plans to buy back the company for $4.7 billion US and views this as an opportunity to improve safety standards and quality at the manufacturer at a time when it is under such pressure, as I mentioned. And this would really reverse Boeing's practice of outsourcing much of the work carried out on its passenger planes. In a statement, the company's chief executive, Dave Calhoun, said that we believe this deal is in the best interests of the flying public, our airline customers, the employees of Spirit and Boeing, our shareholders, and the country more broadly. The Federal Aviation Administration announced increased oversight of Boeing and Spirit after the blowout of a panel on a Boeing plane of January this year. On that plane, the fuselage was supplied by Spirit. So this deal is seen as part of Boeing's plans to increase safety and restore its image, which has been badly impacted by all of these incidents I've just been mentioning.
Indeed. Well, Mitch, thanks very much for that. That's Mitch McCann reporting from New York.
The first shipment of cars from Chery's international brand Omoda has arrived in the UK. The Omoda 5 will be the first model available to buyers in Britain. The Chinese automaker hopes to compete with Nissan's Qashqai and Hyundai's Kona in the European market, with a target of 50,000 sales a year by the end of 2028. Ray Wang is Executive Vice President of Omoda and its sister brand, Jaiku UK. What is it, do you think, about your strategy that might be different from other Chinese automakers entering this market?
Despite of our competitors, especially the Chinese competitors, we are offering a combination of different drivetrains, including petrol and for pure electric and plug-in hybrid. So we've been the #1 for car export among all the Chinese OEMs. So we have learned a lot. We've got a lot of experience.
You are seeking to have a bigger footprint in Europe. So when are you going to open a production plant in Britain?
We are always investigating the most effective way of manufacturing our products to ensure they are as competitive as possible. So the UK offers several attractive options in terms of manufacturing. So we are still, exploring that opportunity.
So are we talking about weeks, months, years, within the decade?
I don't have, much information to provide, but what I can say is we are seriously looking for that opportunity in this country.
So the EU has imposed these extra tariffs now on Chinese-made auto parts and EVs. How is Chery coping with that?
Ultimately, we will work as effectively as we can within the rules, whatever that might be. Our great strength is flexibility, as I mentioned. We can react to whatever the situation is very quickly to ensure our products remain competitive in every market.
So tell me a little bit about why you're developing this greener kind of battery.
We have a number of initiatives coming in to ensure increasing levels of sustainability, from our investment in things like sodium battery technology to minimizing the use of energy at all stages of the production process. We are working on sustainability all the time. We also have various global initiatives to conjunction with like IUCN to support things like wetland preservation and river cleaning.
Do you think sodium, is that going to be the next big thing in battery technology?
I think so. So no matter in terms of technology or cost, I think it's going to be a good option for this industry.
UK Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and opposition leader Keir Starmer into the final days of campaigning before the country chooses its next government. Starmer says that progressive parties such as Labour are the only ones able to meet the challenges posed by the rise of the far right, while Sunak has promised further tax cuts to win over undecided voters. Well, let's have a closer look at some of the issues concerning voters.
The conflict in Ukraine sparked a surge in the cost of food and energy, causing the UK's worst inflation shock in decades. Prices have risen 22% since March 2021, leaving many people struggling to make ends meet. Immigration is another hot topic. The Conservative government vowed to crack down on people crossing the Channel in small boats. A controversial plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda never got off the ground. And the number of migrants who have crossed the Channel so far this year has hit a new record, up 17% compared to the first half of last year. The COVID pandemic shone a spotlight on the UK's National Health Service, as a $40 billion funding shortfall left hospitals struggling to cope. Former Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson famously promised that Brexit would send money flowing into NHS coffers, but that never happened, and the NHS has been dogged by staff shortages and long hospital waiting lists. Flash floods and freak heat waves have brought climate change to the front of many voters' minds. The UK currently has a target to reduce its planet-warming gases to net zero by 2050. Britain was the first major economy to set a net zero emissions target. But last year, the government backtracked on a number of policies, including delaying the ban on petrol and diesel vehicles.
Well, that was CGTN's Sally Burdett. And CGTN correspondents have been visiting different parts of the United Kingdom to better understand what's on voters' minds. Jen Copestake went to Wolverhampton and Birmingham in the West Midlands to see how the cost of living crisis has affected people in one of the most deprived areas of Britain.
Across the UK, rising costs have led to years of austerity and challenges to make ends meet. The West Midlands, a region including England's second city, Birmingham, ranks as one of the most deprived areas of the country.
We've certainly noticed a rise, certainly in energy bills. They've gone up significantly.
My motor car, for instance, I used to use a certain amount of money to fill it up. But it seems as if I get half of that. And, you know, if I'm not careful, I run out of run out of petrol.
I currently live with my family, and it's because I'm not able to find somewhere that's actually affordable for myself. Wages aren't really increasing in reflection with inflation that's currently ongoing, so it's looking less and less affordable.
Example for me, I'm single with the kids. It's everything they change for me, because sometimes when you don't pay the bill hours, you don't top up your energy, sometimes you can't do nothing. That is a problem.
There are over 4 million children living in poverty in the UK, or what the government calls relative low-income households. That's 30% of all children. Almost half the children here in Birmingham, that's 46%, fall into that category. The Inner City Life Centre in Birmingham runs programs on food insecurity, job creation, and poverty alleviation. Once a week, it distributes food parcels from a small warehouse, and they have just opened a charity shop across the street.
We're open to support people who do not have enough cash, because we've got a lot of mothers coming in to shop for their kids. We need to show kids as much love as possible. The issue of, I say, socioeconomic poverty requires a collective solution. Everyone needs to, come together to find ways to deal with it.
The Wolverhampton Muslim Forum is also providing a weekly food hamper to people who need it. Their charity was originally started in 2010 to help rebuild homes for flood victims in Pakistan, but in recent years its attention has turned to helping closer to home.
Currently we are serving 70 families, around 200 people plus, including children as well, and the demand is ever growing. It is much needed now, as much as it was needed during the COVID.
Even before we got here, there's a queue out there. By 12:30, the queue is going all the way around. There's families, there's singles, anybody that comes to us who is in need of food, basically.
With the election just days away, Taiba is pragmatic about the difference a change of government will make.
The election will make a massive difference. This community needs help from whoever comes in to get it back on its feet and help the vulnerable here as well.
Jen Copestake, CGTN, West Midlands.
And you can get the highlights from the week's news here in Europe and in China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. You can sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The US Supreme Court delivers a mixed ruling on whether Donald Trump can be prosecuted as he faces action for trying to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and Paul Barber. Our headlines again. The far-right National Rally has won the first round of France's parliamentary elections.
China's small and medium-sized manufacturers are the engine of growth again, expanding at the fastest rate in 3 years.
And Boeing has agreed to buy back Spirit Aerosystems, the fuselage maker it spun off, in a deal worth $4.7 billion.
The US Supreme Court has ruled that the former President Donald Trump is partially immune to criminal prosecution as he faces action for trying to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
Our correspondent Benji Haya has more details from Washington.
This was a long-awaited judgment from the justices in the building behind me, and pretty much the headline from it is that the court holds that a former president has absolute immunity for his core constitutional powers and his official acts. Now, you might be asking, what are core constitutional powers? What are official acts? Well, former presidents are entitled to presumption of immunity for these, and they are things like appointing ambassadors, foreign governments. So it's the sort of things that are, you know, plainly the official administrative roles of a president. They do not necessarily apply to the sort of things that Donald Trump is alleged to have done in terms of his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. But justices on the Supreme Court have been careful not to give any sort of definitive ruling here. They say that no court, not even the Supreme Court, has considered how to distinguish between official and unofficial acts, and the Supreme Court isn't going to make that determination today. It will send this case back down to the lower courts to make that distinction, and for there to be some sort of clarity over where immunity would be applied. There has already been some dissent from the more liberal-leaning justices on the Supreme Court. They say that this decision to grant former presidents criminal immunity, even if it is for just official acts, they say that reshapes the institution of the presidency, makes a mockery, they say, of the principal foundation of our Constitution and the system of government, that no man is above the law. So this will have huge reverberations going forward, and one man is quite pleased about this outcome. Despite not given absolute immunity for all his actions, Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social, quote, "This is a big win for our Constitution and democracy." He says he's proud to be an American.
So Donald Trump taking this as something of a win for him. How could it impact his campaign to return to the White House? Could it affect the election at all?
The most significant outcome is that effectively this pushes the can down the road. So that trial that was expected to happen here in Washington, D.C. to, according to the prosecution, hold him to account for his alleged crimes, his efforts to subvert democracy, to overturn the election results of 2020, that is now going to be put on hold whilst the lower court deliberates what I was speaking about before. And that essentially could mean that that trial doesn't happen until after the November 5th polling day. And if Donald Trump wins, he could throw this case out and the Justice Department would no longer consider it. There are, of course, other criminal trials that he faces. He is alleged to have mishandled classified documents, that case taking place in Florida. He is in the state of Georgia, again facing charges related to his alleged attempts to overturn the election outcome in 2020. And he's already been criminally convicted in New York for hush money payments. His sentencing there is on July 11th. But none of these, Paul, stop him constitutionally from vying for the Oval Office again. And polls indicate that many of his supporters will not stop backing him despite these legal woes that he continues to face.
Israeli tanks have advanced on the Gaza City district of Shuja'iyeh, trapping civilians while fighting intensifies. Israeli forces launched the operation in northern Gaza 5 days ago, backed up by airstrikes and heavy shelling.
At least 80,000 people have fled the area, but others are unable to leave and have no access to food or medical care. Meanwhile, the armed wing of Islamic Jihad says its fighters fired a barrage of rockets towards several Israeli settlements near the border fence with Gaza.
Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari reports from Gaza.
Well, the operation in Shuja'iyeh continues, and the destruction that is resulting from that operation is continuous as well. The Israeli occupation army has been destroying whole residential blocks, either by targeting them with heavy fire built from different areas, or by just booby-trapping whole blocks and destroying them. According to the Palestinian Minister of Health, 23 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours, and around 91 others were injured. And the people who are living by Salah ad-Din Street, the street that goes from the very north of the Gaza Strip to the very south of the Gaza Strip, have been reporting about seeing hundreds of Palestinians leaving the area of Shuja'iyeh, heading through that Salah ad-Din Street to the south of Gaza. Some of them are injured, some of them are fleeing with nothing whatsoever after the bombardment almost killed them, and they are fully aware that their homes were destroyed and that they had to leave their homes under the heavy fire that was continuous. As to the Palestinian factions, they have been repeatedly releasing some statements saying they have been facing the Israeli troops that have been advancing into Ash-Shaja'iyya. They have been ambushing them. They have been booby-trapping houses. They have been using anti-armored projectiles for the sake of just blowing up the Israeli tanks that have been advancing into Ash-Shaja'iyya. And according to the Israeli sources, several Israeli soldiers were killed and dozens others were injured. So the fighting is still continuous. The exchange of fire is at a peak, and this ground operation is likely to continue bringing destruction, displacement, death and injury to the people in Ash-Shaja'iyya and Gaza at large.
Akram Al-Satari, our Gaza correspondent there. Meanwhile, Israel says it has carried out airstrikes on Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon. That's after 18 Israeli soldiers were injured when a drone struck their position in the occupied Golan Heights. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev is in Tel Aviv for us now. Jonathan, what more do we know about these strikes?
Yes, and continued strikes of the mostly Israeli Air Force in Lebanon. Israel is constantly targeting Hezbollah operatives, meaning it spots those operatives going into some kind of a building and then targeting the building as those operatives are in. It's part of this ongoing war. There's no other word to describe it going on in the Israel-Lebanon border. Yes, a war, but with certain rules of engagement. Israel does not strike as far as Beirut, for example, and Hezbollah does not strike as far south as Haifa, for example. Most of the strikes are along the border area, but they have been going on for nearly 9 months, and the civilian population in both sides of the border is practically gone. Both the Israeli communities close to the border and the Lebanese border communities close to the border are practically deserted. At least for now, this war has not escalated into a full-on war, but of course there's potential for it to happen at any minute. And last night we saw this incident which you mentioned, in which 18 Israeli soldiers were injured in a drone strikes in the Golan Heights. One of them was severely injured, and this has been ongoing for practically for 9 months since the war began. Both sides, at least for the moment, not indicating that they're interested in a full-on war, but of course that can still happen.
OK, Jonathan, another developing story today. Scuffles broke out between ultra-Orthodox Jews and the police during a protest against a Supreme Court order for them to begin enlisting in the military. What happened?
Yes, and it was quite a violent protest in Jerusalem on Sunday night. How violent it was, let's just understand that even some of the community leaders, community Orthodox leaders, were attacked in that protest. Stones were thrown at the cars of members of parliament from the Orthodox parties who went by. Those protesting came from the very extreme sects of the Orthodox community, and of course this comes on the back of the Supreme Court decision, which calls for the enlisting of ultra-Orthodox to the army. Of course, they've been exempt from military service since basically the State of Israel was established 76 years ago. But back then, David Ben-Gurion, the founder of the State of Israel, exempted some 800 or 900 people from the army. Today, we're speaking of tens of thousands, and the army is saying we simply need those people. On the other hand, the Orthodox community refuses to go to the army no matter what, and this is what led to that rather violent protest we saw in Jerusalem last night.
Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv, thank you very much.
Donald Trump's former top advisor, Steve Bannon, has described himself as a political prisoner as he reported to jail to serve a 4-month sentence for contempt of Congress. Bannon was a key ally during Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and later served as chief White House strategist. He was convicted for refusing to give evidence during Congress's investigation of the January the 6th Capitol riots.
In South Korea, at least 9 people have been killed and 4 others injured after a car drove into a crowd of people near Seoul City Hall. South Korean media say the vehicle rammed into pedestrians on a crossing after hitting 2 other cars. Police are investigating, but have declined to give any further information.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has included the former leader of the opposition in his coalition cabinet. The Democratic Alliance leader, John Steenhuisen, has been named Agriculture Minister. Ramaphosa's African National Congress was forced to work with rival parties after losing its majority for the first time in 30 years.
Hungary has assumed the rotating presidency of the European Union with a vow to make Europe great again. Hungary's nationalist government, led by Viktor Orbán, will set the EU's agenda for the rest of this year. The country has a history of blocking funds for Ukraine, which has concerned EU diplomats. Orbán says his priorities include EU membership for Western Balkan countries, illegal immigration and economic competitiveness.
Hurricane Beryl has made landfall in the Grenadines as a Category 4 storm. It's been described as extremely dangerous with wind speeds of almost 200 kilometres per hour. The Prime Minister of St Vincent and the Grenadines says he's expecting a natural disaster that could last for days.
Severe flooding and landslides have killed 4 people in Switzerland. Another 2 are missing after violent thunderstorms and melting snow caused flooding in 2 southern cantons. Meanwhile, in Italy, mudslides have forced more than 300 people from their homes, with many evacuated by helicopter. The president of the Comoros has been speaking exclusively to CGTN about the climate challenges that his country faces. Azali Assoumani has called for more investment and support from major nations. He's been speaking to our correspondent, William Denslow.
Il faut qu'on soit autonome sur le plan alimentaire.
We need to be self-sufficient in terms of food, because we are a country struggling with climate change. So we experience floods, we experience cyclones, rising water levels, droughts. So these are times when people can't work. So in terms of food, we must have something to store. If, unfortunately, we face an incident, the population has a minimum to live on in order not to be exposed to famine. Recently, I received a mission that came from China in the context of aquaculture. How can we effectively invest in aquaculture so that the food cultivation necessary to feed the population can be developed?
The devastating impact of climate change and inspiring stories of saving the planet could be featured in more films and TV shows as part of efforts to raise awareness.
This year's Hollywood Climate Summit has been looking at how filmmakers can bring environmental issues to the fore while still being entertaining. Our correspondent Adis Chanshan reports.
Hollywood is considered one of the most powerful tools for spreading ideas. And for the 5th year in a row, climate activists have brought together artists, writers, filmmakers, and media professionals for the Hollywood Climate Summit.
It has, that mixture of celebrity and expert that we love, and ultimately it's about amplifying those frontline climate leaders and voices, and then also creating that entry point for high-level talent to feel engaged and excited and realize it doesn't have to be scary to talk about climate. It really just can be a part of our everyday lives.
Held at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in Beverly Hills, the 4-day-long event aims to raise awareness about climate action while providing a platform to share ideas, resources, and expertise.
How can we build community across the entertainment and media landscape while also providing some climate literacy, connecting grassroots climate leaders with media professionals so we can amplify their voices and understand their stories and do a better job in media of portraying them.
A wide range of programming includes writing workshops, networking, and film screening on climate change, while panel discussions have brought together Hollywood talent with high-profile figures like the U.S. Secretary of Energy.
For the first time in American history, we actually expect energy from solar and wind to outpace the energy we get from coal. Yes!
Many companies pushing for a transition to clean energy use this opportunity to reach across Hollywood.
We're more of an education-based explainer to industry professionals of what green tech can do and the application process and how it can be used. We also distribute equipment while we're training technicians how to use it, and gathering data to show the studios and the different clients how the equipment works and the positive effects it can have and the offset of emissions and things like that.
Initially starting out as an online event, the Hollywood Climate Summit has grown exponentially over the years. harnessing Hollywood's pivotal role and influence in the climate movement toward a green future. It is Tian Shan, CGTN, Hollywood.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Visa-free travel to China begins for people from Poland. But is that going to mean lift-off for tourism?
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back.
From today, people from Poland can travel to China without a visa for up to 15 days.
The extension of China's visa-free policy was announced during the Polish president's visit to Beijing last week and led to a surge in online searches about travel to China.
Well, our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger has more now from Warsaw.
Less bureaucracy for Poles wishing to travel to China. Beijing temporarily extended visa-free access for the Central Eastern European country to enhance people-to-people exchanges with other nations. So no visa needed for a trip of up to 15 days. After the announcement, the number of searches for China-related keywords on Polish travel platforms almost doubled, with Shanghai the most popular destination, followed by Beijing. Nonetheless, flights to the People's Republic are still expensive for a regular Polish traveler, and visas were only a fraction of the cost. Locals here in Warsaw are hoping for more and perhaps cheaper flights to China.
It's very good for Polish people, yes, I agree.
When you don't have to spend your time on this paperwork.
I don't know much about China, but obviously really interesting place in terms of culture, and cities look pretty modern.
I want to perform in China.
Can you sing something for us?
Sing something?
Yeah.
Okay. Heartaches, heartaches, my love in you and only heartaches.
Poland's President Andrzej Duda is very pleased, saying the possibility of personal communication was very important to him. But it won't just be more tourists for China. The new visa regulations will mean more spontaneous business trips from Warsaw. China is Poland's second largest trading partner for imports. However, Chinese citizens wishing to enter Poland must still apply for a Schengen visa. China hopes its new visa policy will encourage other countries to also grant visa facilitation to Chinese nationals. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Warsaw.
Euro 2024 hosts Germany are through to the quarter-finals alongside Spain, England and Switzerland. But who will join them? France are playing their neighbours Belgium in Dusseldorf. The score is currently 0-0 at half-time. It's been 40 years since the two sides last met at a Euros match, and France have won all 4 of their previous clashes at a major tournament.
And the 2016 champions Portugal faced Slovenia in Frankfurt. It's the first time Slovenia have played in the knockout stage of a major competition.
An 18-year-old from Toronto has become the highest Chinese-born hockey player ever to be selected in the National Hockey League draft.
Kevin He was the 109th pick in the 4th round on Saturday, selected by the Winnipeg Jets. CGTN's Hendrik Sybrandy reports from Las Vegas.
The NHL went big this year, holding its 2024 draft at the Sphere in Las Vegas. This massive entertainment complex just off the Las Vegas Strip is where 225 young hockey players found out which teams, which organizations they'll be playing for, including one young man born in China. His name is Kevin He. Until now, the earliest a player born in China had been chosen in the NHL draft was in the 6th round back in 2015. In the 4th round on Saturday, the Winnipeg Jets made He the 109th player selected in this year's draft.
Honestly, I thought it was going to be much more nervous and anxious, but I was pretty at peace, and heading into today, I was pretty calm, actually. So.
That scores! Kevin He! The 18-year-old is a speedy forward who played for the Niagara Ice Dogs of the Ontario Hockey League. He was born in Beijing. When he was 5 years old, his family moved to Canada.
Growing up, I bounced around a little bit, so obviously born in China and moved to Montreal and into Toronto, so I bounced around a little bit, and yeah, it's a dream come true.
He got the skating bug early.
I fell in love with it. I started skiing with my dad when I was really young. I did a lot of rollerblading. So, you know, in China, they don't have hockey arenas, but they had these ice pads in the malls. So I started skating with my dad over there and did a lot of rollerblading. And then I started playing in a league, competitive hockey, when I moved to Montreal.
Known for his speed on the ice, he describes his approach to ice hockey this way.
Competitive, you know. I'm a hungry player. I want to win. I always play with the chip on my shoulder. I'm skilled as well. Can skate well and can shoot. So.
He's prepared to be a role model for young athletes in China, where the sport of ice hockey is nowhere near as developed as in North America and Europe. For now, he, who said he was shocked and speechless when he was selected by the Jets, is letting it all soak in and trying to stay in the moment. His favorite NHL team?
Favorite team? Winnipeg Jets now. Let's go. It's an incredible, huge honor. I have a lot of, fans texting me and stuff right before the draft. They're wishing me good luck, and thank you. I've shown the support, so it's a huge honor for me.
His first priority is putting on some weight so he can withstand the rigors and physical challenges of professional ice hockey. There's no guarantee he'll even make it to the NHL, but the talent is there, a team believes in him, and his journey has begun, and he's made some history along the way. Hendrik Sybrandy, CGTN, Las Vegas.
Anyone for tennis? Defending men's champion Carlos Alcaraz is through to the 2nd round of this year's Wimbledon tournament.
Yes, the 21-year-old beat Estonian qualifier Mark Lyall in straight sets. Britain's Emma Raducanu has returned to centre court after missing last year's tournament due to injury. And one of the favourites to win the women's title, Coco Gauff, is also due to play.
Reminder of your headlines. China's small and medium-sized manufacturers are the engine of growth again, expanding at the fastest rates in 3 years.
The far-right National Rally has won the first round of France's parliamentary elections.
And the US Supreme Court has ruled that the former President Donald Trump is partially immune to prosecution as he faces actions for trying to overturn the 2020 election result.
That's it. That's Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. But we'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Bye-bye.